With Tepig being in Legends ZA, I figured I should attempt to do a hardcore Nuzlocke in the Unova region. However, since I recently did a fire type Nuzlocke, which you should totally watch after this video, I wanted to see if I could be a Pokemon White 2 hardcore Nuzlocke with only flying types. Will my flying friends be able to dominate the Unova region or be shot out of the sky? Let's find out. I picked Tepig as the starters so that Hugh will have Samurott and wouldn't be a pushover. Before heading out, Mom gives me running shoes and my sister gives me a town map and a second one to give to Hugh. On my way to Ghetsis town, I met Alder, who wants to train us a little. Okay, old man, but didn't you lose to some kids? Oh, we don't talk about that. He then sees that I have two town maps and wants to know why. I inform him that the second one is for Hugh, and he tells us that he saw him on Route 20 training. On Route 20, I catch my real starter, Pidove, and name her Peggy. I find Hugh at the Ghetsis ranch, and he wants to have a battle. I hit him with a gust, doing about a quarter of his health. He goes for tackle, doing about a quarter of Peggy's health as well. After 4 more gusts, Oshawott is defeated. After our battle, I gave him the town map. The ranch owners then come by after hearing the commotion of our battle. They give me a potion and ask us if we've seen their other herdier. Hugh then freaks out that they're a little worried about it and goes searching for it immediately. We find the herdier with a Team Plasma grunt. The grunt gives me the TM for frustration and runs away. Okay, wuss. I head back to Alder and he has me battle some kids who I effortlessly beat. On my way back to Esperia City, Alder jumps off of a cliff. Okay, what the heck? How tall is that cliff? He gives me some orange berries. I make my way to the first gym where I am given some fresh water. After beating the trainers, I challenge Charon. He starts with a Pat Rat. I used Leer to lower his defense and he goes for workup, raising his attack up. Quick attack brings Pat Rat to half health. He goes for another workup. A second quick attack then finishes it off. Lillipup goes for workup and I use Leer to weaken it. Quick attack brings Lillipup to almost half health and a tackle from Lillipup almost brings Peggy to half health as well. A second quick attack brings it to 1 HP and a second tackle ends up being a critical and kills Peggy. Bruh. I attempted a second time and this time I gave Peggy an Oranberry and it helped that he went for a second workup instead of tackle. He uses a potion and with 2 more quick attacks, Lillipup is defeated, winning me my first gym badge. After walking out of the gym, Bianca gives me the TM for return and Professor Juniper calls us. After our conversation, I head to Verbank City where I see Roxy and her dad arguing about him trying to become a movie star. She storms off to her gym and after some training I soon challenge her. She starts with coughing and I still only have Peggy. I go for workup to increase Peggy's special attack. Coughing goes for a tackle, doing about a quarter of damage. I do a second workup and she goes for another tackle. Air Cutter brings coughing to the red and tackle brings Peggy to the yellow. She uses a super potion to heal her coughing and I used Roost knowing that she would use a potion. Air Cutter then obliterates coughing thanks to it being critical. 2 air cutters take out Whirlipede, winning me my second badge. I head to the movie theaters area to get the captain to go back to his job. The captain insists we watch his new movie, which ended up being really bad. Captain, stick to your day job. He then heads back to his job. After finishing up the theater stuff, I make my way down to the shipyard and Team Plasma is there, of course. We beat up the grunts and they flee to Route 20. I find the grunt on Route 20 and beat them up. I then hop on the ship and head to Castelia City. A random guy in the clown outfit gives me a bike. I try to go challenge the gym, but Berg was not there. Iris comes by and mentions that he might be investigating the sewers. In the sewers, Hugh and I found some Zubats and I managed to catch one of them and named him Batman. We then found some grunts and beat them up as well. Berg shows up and Hugh gives me the HM move Strength. Colress also shows up randomly. After some training, Batman evolves into a Golbat. Piggy also evolves after some training. I then challenge Berg. He starts with Swadloon and I start with Batman. One wing attack kills Swadloon. Dwebble comes out and I land a Confuse Ray on it, but it still gets a Rock Polish off. With a few more wing attacks, Dwebble gets to the red just for him to use a Hyper Potion. With a few more hits, Dwebble gets to the yellow, but Batman got to the red as well. I swapped him out with Peggy, who was able to take a smackdown. Dwebble hurts itself thanks to confusion, and a critical air cutter finishes it off. Levanti comes out and gets obliterated by an air cutter, winning me my third gym badge. I make my way to Route 4, but the route is blocked by a bunch of Crustles. Luckily, Chorus had a device that made them move. He then challenges me to a battle. He starts with Magnemite and I start with Batman. I used Confuse Ray to confuse Magnemite and thankfully it hurt itself. I used Bite to try and flinch him. Unfortunately, I didn't get the flinch. Fortunately, he hurt himself. A second Bite gets him to low yellow and causes him to flinch. He goes for a super potion and I go for a bite. A fourth bite makes him flinch as well. The fifth bite takes him back to yellow, but he snaps out of confusion and he lands a Thunder Wave, paralyzing Batman. Batman lives a spark and lands another Confuse Ray. He hurts himself thanks to the confusion and wing attack finishes him off. Clink comes out and uses Thunder Shock. Batman survives, but is unable to move because of the paralysis. Clink misses a gear grind and Batman lands a Confuse Ray. I switch to Peggy to keep Batman alive. Clink goes for a charge. I use Work Up to raise Peggy's attack. He goes for a charge once more. I get another Work Up and he hurts himself this time. Quick Attack brings Clink to low green. A second Quick Attack brings it to the red, and Peggy survives a gear grind. A third Quick Attack then finishes Clink off. Chorus then gives me a protein. I find the Static Bravery. I catch him and name him America. I picked up the Soothe Bell from an old lady. On Route 16, I catch an Emolga and name him Scrat. I caught a Combi in the Lost Lorne Forest and named her Queen. After some training, Queenie evolves into a Vespiquen, and after raising my friendship with Batman, he evolves into a Crobat. Next, I take on Alyssa. She starts with Emolga, and I start with Batman. I used Confuse Ray, but she went for a Volt Switch. Luckily, Batman was able to tank the hit. Flaffy comes out and gets confused by a Confuse Ray from Batman and hurts itself. It then gets a Thunder Wave on Batman. Luckily, I had given him a Cherry Berry, curing the paralysis. Bite brings it close to yellow, but gets paralyzed because of static. Thankfully, Flaffy hurts itself in confusion. It lands a Volt Switch and Batman barely survives it. Batman does about a third of damage to Emolga. I switch to Queen to keep Batman from fainting. Power Gem finishes Emolga off. Flaffy gets a Volt Switch on Queen and takes her health to about a third. Power Gem does about a quarter of damage to Zebstrika. I switch to Scrat, who tanks a Volt Switch, but has about half of his health left. Flaffy comes back out and Acrobatics brings it to the red, but she gets a Thunder Wave off. She heals with a Hyper Potion. Acrobatics takes about a third of her health down. Scrat survives a Volt Switch and lands Acrobatics on Zebstrika, bringing it to half and popping her Citrus Berry. I switch to America. Slash brings Zebstrika to the red. For whatever reason, she goes for a Quick Attack instead of Spark, allowing a second slash to finish Zebstrika off. One slash finishes Flaffy off, winning me my fourth badge. On my way to Route 5, Hugh and I found Team Plasma blocking the way. Hugh and I battle them and make them flee. On Route 5, Bianca gives me the HM move Fly. I had a triple battle with this random motorcyclist and beat him. On the drawbridge, I found a Ducklet. I caught her and named her Skyla. On another bridge, I found a Plasma Grunt and an X-member arguing. Hugh butts in and scares the Grunt away. I then make my way to the X-Plasma Grunt's base and have a battle with Rud, who I easily beat. Hugh joins us and angrily asks where his sister's purloin is. They tell him that it's not there and he angrily leaves. Rud tries to offer me a Zoroark, but I tell him no and that I am a flying type main. After some training, Peggy evolves. I then challenge Clay. He starts with Krokorok and I lead with Batman. His Krokorok has the ability Intimidate, which lowers my Pokemon's attack stat upon him entering. I use Confuse Ray to confuse him and he hurts himself. Acrobatics brings Crooked Rock to the red, and he hurts himself again, causing him to faint. He sends out Excadrill. I use Confuse Ray again, and his Excadrill hurts itself. I go for Bite to try and flinch him. I don't get the flinch, but he hurts himself from the confusion. A second bite brings him to the yellow and activates his Citrus Berry. He then hurts himself again. A third bite brings him back to half health, and he snaps out of confusion and thankfully misses a Rock Slide. Sheesh. That was a close one. I get another Confuse Ray on him, but he lands a Rock Slide. Yikes. Thankfully, Batman survived. I switch to Skyla, and thankfully he hurts himself in confusion. Clay then uses a Hyper Potion. Bubble Beam brings Excadrill back to half health. He hurts himself again, and Bubble Beam finishes him off. Sandslash is his last Pokemon. Skyla survives a Crush Claw, and Bubble Beam brings Sandslash to about a quarter left of its health and lowers his speed, allowing Skyla to outspeed and finish it off with a Bubble Beam, winning me my 5th badge. Clay then shows Hugh and me the new tournament and has us participate in the Driftville tournament. Sharon also joins the tournament along with Colress for who knows why. My first opponent is none other than Hugh. He starts with Duat and I start with Batman. I get Confuse Ray on him and he hurts himself. Acrobatics finishes Duat off. Tranquil comes out and has the same fate happen to it. Simisage is defeated by Acrobatics. Sharon is my next opponent and loses to the same strategy. Colress starts with Magneton and I get a Confuse Ray off and he hurts himself. Bite doesn't do much damage, but he ends up flinching. A second bite makes him flinch again. A third bite brings him to the yellow and he lands a Thunder Wave. He hurts himself and Bite brings him to the red. Thundershock does about a quarter of Batman's health and Batman can't move because of the paralysis. A second Thundershock brings Batman to the yellow and once again he can't move. I switch to Queen, who is able to tank a Thundershock. She avoids a Supersonic and finishes Magneton off with Bug Bite. Clink comes out. Queen pulls off a critical Bug Bite and brings Clink to a third of its health. Clink goes for a Thundershock, which doesn't do much. 2 more Bug Bites finishes it off. I use Heal Order, which honestly I don't even know why, because Bug Bite one-shots his Elgian, making me the champion of this tournament. After some training, Skyla evolves. We find Team Plasma's ship nearby and storm it. I beat 2 of them up. I then assisted Charon and we beat up some more grunts. I joined Hugh afterwards and we beat the grunts up. Zinzalin shows up and instantly recognizes Charon. They kick us off the ship and skedaddle away. On Route 6, Charon shows off a weather station to me. Okay, that's nice, Charon, but I didn't ask. I make it to the next town and Professor Juniper gives me a Master Ball. I make my way to challenge Skyla. She leads with a Swoobat and I lead with Scrat. Volt Switch brings Swoobat to the red. America comes out and I set up a Tailwind to ensure my Pokemon will move first. Slash brings Swoobat to a third of its life and Swoobat goes for a track. America overcomes its fake love with Swoobat and wrecks it with Slash. Swanna comes out. I use Hone Claws to increase America's attack stat and accuracy. Air Slash brings America to half health. The Tailwind runs out, allowing her to land a second Air Slash, bringing him to the red and flinches. I switch to Scrat and a critical Volt Switch obliterates her Swanna. I bring Batman out and she brings out Skarmory. I use Confuse Ray, but she gets an agility off. Skarmory hurts itself in confusion and Bite does very little damage. Batman avoids a Steel Wing and Bite once again doesn't do much damage. I switch to my Skyla and Skarmory hurts itself. Steel Wing barely does damage to Skyla and Surf brings Skarmory to the red. A second Surf finishes it off, winning me my 6th badge. On the reverse mountain route, I catch a Skarmory of my own and named him Starscream. After traveling through the mountain, I make it to Undella Town. On my way to the next route, Hugh wants to have a battle. He leads with Unpheasant and I lead with America. He uses Taunt, preventing me from using Tailwind. I switch to Scrat. I use Acrobatics, bringing Unpheasant to low green. He goes for a Razor Wind. Volt Switch finishes Unpheasant off and I switch into Batman. He brings out Samurott. I go for a Confuse Ray and he goes for Revenge for whatever reason. He snaps out of confusion and goes for an Aqua Jet and I go for Bite. He goes for another Aqua Jet and I go for a Confuse Ray. I switch to Scrat and Samurott finally hurts itself. Acrobatics brings Samurott to the yellow and Revenge brings Scrat to the yellow as well. Aqua Jet brings Scrat to the red and Volt Switch finishes Samurott off. I bring out Queen and he brings out Simisage. He goes for Seed Bomb, which barely does any damage, and I go for Toxic. He goes for another seed bomb. I go for air slash, which brings him to the red, and poison finishes him off. I make my way to Lacunosa town. I join Professor Juniper and Bianca and discuss with an old lady about the giant chasm. Hugh and I find Zinzalin and a grunt and battle them. We manage to beat them up and they run away. On Route 11, I find a Gligar. I catch it and name him Nightwing. After collecting 8 battle points, I buy the Razor Fang and evolve Nightwing into Gliscor. I make my way to challenge Drayden. He starts with Druddigon and I start with Batman. I go for Confuse Ray and he hurts himself in confusion. I switch to Queen, who tanks a crunch. She tanks another crunch and lands a toxic on Druddigon. Queen survives a third crunch. She uses Heal Order, healing her back to green. A second Heal Order brings her to full and Druddigon goes for revenge. Air Slash and Poison finish Druddigon off. Flygon is next. Queen poisons it with Toxic and he goes for Dragon Tail, forcing her to switch with Scrat. I had Scrat use Double Team to avoid Rock Slide. I used a second Double Team, but he lands a Rock Slide, bringing Scrat to low yellow. I switched to Starscream, tanking a crunch. Poison brings Flygon to the yellow. A Rock Slide causes Starscream to flinch and Poison brings Flygon to the red. Drayden uses a Hyper Potion and I set up spikes. Starscream avoids a Rock Slide and gets a second layer of spikes up. I use Fly to protect Starscream and Poison finishes Flygon off. Haxorus comes out and is hurt a little by the spikes. Fly brings it to the yellow. His Citrus Berry brings him back to the green. Dragon Tail makes Starscream switch with Batman. I use Confuse Ray, but he gets a Dragon Dance off. He then hurts himself in confusion, bringing himself into the yellow, and Poison Fang brings him to the red and poisons him. He gets off another Dragon Dance and Acrobatics finishes him off, winning me my 7th badge. Drayden has me come to his house and he explains more about the origins of Zekrom and Reshiram. He mentions about the DNA splicers. Team Plasma then appears in the sky on their ship and blasts the heck out of the city with the power of Kirim. What the frick? Zinzalin and his goons show up and he demands Drayden to hand over the DNA splicers. He of course refuses and they go search for them. After beating up the grunts, I confront Zinzalin. He starts with Cryogonal and I start with Starscream. He goes for Confuse Ray. Starscream lands the Steel Wing and one-shots Cryogonal. The second Cryogonal sets up a light screen and feints to Steel Wing as well. He brings out Weavile and goes for Ice Shard, which doesn't do much damage. Steel Wing brings Weavile to the red. Starscream gets hit by another Ice Shard and hurts itself. A third Steel Wing finishes Weavile off. Zinzalin runs off and Drayden checks on the DNA splicers and grabs them. A Shadow Triad then steals them. I beat one of them, but he was just stalling, allowing them to escape. Hugh and Charon call me, checking up on me after seeing the ship in the sky. Charon shows up and we decide to go after Team Plasma. On Route 14, I find a Driftblim and catch it. I made it to the final gym, but the gym leader went swimming. Bruh. I found him swimming and he headed back to the gym. I challenge Marlin. He starts with Caracosta and I start with Scrat. Discharge brings Caracosta to about a quarter of its health. Smackdown brings Scrat to the red. The second discharge finishes Caracosta off. Wailord is his next and is defeated by a critical discharge. His final Pokemon is Jellicent. I go for Volt Switch and switch into Batman. Batman takes a brine. He lands a Confuse Ray and Jellicent heals with Recover. I switch to Queen. She handles 2 Scalds and lands a Toxic. I switch to Skyla to Poison Stall. Air Slash brings Jellicent to the low green. Skyla tanks an Ominous Wind and Poison brings Jellicent to the yellow. Air Slash brings Jellicent to the yellow and flinches it. Poison takes it to the red. He heals up with a Hyper Potion, 2 more Air Slashes, and Poison finishes him off, winning me my last badge. Hugh and I agreed to split up. I check the cave on Route 22 and find 2 grunts who mention about important people heading to Route 21. Hugh and I find the ship on Route 21 and Marlin helps us be able to get on the ship. We storm in and beat up the guards. We find some barriers that need a password to get through. We split up to find the password. I beat up a grunt and get the plasma card. After beating up the grunts, I figured out the password was Zekrom. Hugh and I confront Zinzalin and a grunt once more. Unfortunately, during the fight, Skyla was defeated. We managed to beat them, but they got away. On Route 21, I find and catch a Mantike. I make my way to the giant chasm. Hugh and I find the ex-Team Plasma members interacting with Team Plasma. The talking failed, so Hugh and I battle a set of grunts, and of course we beat them. The ex-members are then motivated to stall the other grunts and allow us to get through. I confronted Zinzolin one final time. Starscream beats all 3 of his ice types with a steel wing, of course. I find Colress and he challenges me to a battle. He leads with Magneton and I lead with Nightwing. Bulldoze brings Magneton to the red, Flash Cannon brings Nightwing to the yellow. Thankfully I gave Nightwing a citrus berry which heals him back up to the green. He uses a full restore, completely healing his Magneton. Bulldoze brings Magneton back to the red and a third one finishes it off. Magnezone comes out and Bulldoze brings it to the red. Flash Cannon sends Nightwing to the red. A second Bulldoze defeats Magnezone. Clink Clang comes out. I switch to Scrat. He goes for a gear grind and gets paralyzed by Scrat's static. I use Volt Switch to do some damage and to switch to America. Thankfully the paralysis pops off. Superpower obliterates Clink Clang. Metane comes out. I switch to Skarmory and the fight between these was almost as bad as Ash's Metapod battle.
2 hours later.
So I switch to Scrat, who is able to finish Metang off with Volt Switch. I bring America out and he brings out Behemoth. How the frick this thing's called. 2 slashes take it down. I find Ghetsis and he goes on a long monologue about conquering the Unova region. A Shadow Triad shows up and reports that Kyurem has been transferred. Hugh shows up and asks the Shadow Triad about his sister's purloin and he reveals that it is now a leopard under his control. He then battles me and I put him in his place. 2 more appear and I beat them up as well. They then leave and I head to confront Ghetsis. Ghetsis brings Kyurem out and attempts to freeze me, but N shows up with Reshiram and confronts Ghetsis. However, Reshiram ends up being fused with Kyurem. I take on Kyurem, I lead with Batman. I use Confuse Ray and it charges up for an Ice Burn. I then go for Poison Fang, doing a little damage, and he misses the Ice Burn, thank goodness. Another Poison Fang does little damage. Batman is able to survive a Fusion Flare. I keep using Poison Fang and Confuse Ray until its health gets low enough for Acrobatics to be able to finish it off. Ghetsis gets mad and challenges me. He starts with Cofagrigus and I start with Batman. I start with Confuse Ray and he goes for Psychic. Luckily Batman is able to tank it. Bite does about a third of its health. Cofagrigus also hurts itself because of confusion, but that damage is irrelevant because it heals that damage from leftovers. A second bite brings it to a third of its health and Batman survives a second Psychic. Sheesh. Acrobatics then finishes it off. Electros comes out. I switch to Nightwing thinking he would go for an electric type move, but he goes for acrobatics instead. I go for Sword Stance to raise Nightwing's attack. He keeps using acrobatics and with 2 X scissors, Electros is defeated. Seismitoad comes out next and is obliterated by acrobatics. Hydreigon comes out. I switch to Starscream who tanks a critical crunch. Rock Slide does some decent damage and causes Starscream to flinch. Starscream survives another Rock Slide and is able to use Fly. This allows Starscream to avoid a Rock Slide and Fly brings Hydreigon close to a third of its health. I switch to Scrat who dodges a Dragon Rush. That was a close one. Acrobatics from Scrat finishes Hydreigon off. Toxicroak comes out and gets one shot by acrobatics. Drapion is his final Pokemon. Volt Switch does about a quarter of Drapion's health. I switch to Queen. Air Slash brings Drapion to a third of its health. A second Air Slash finishes him off. Ghetsis is then shocked and furious that he lost again. A Shadow Triad then takes him away and N makes his leave. On Victory Road, I find an Altaria. I catch him and name him Blue. At the end of the Victory Road, Hugh comes to challenge me. He starts with Unpheasant and I start with Batman. I use Confuse Ray and he hurts himself in confusion. Poison Fang does about a third of its health. Unpheasant is able to use Facade, dealing about a third of damage. A second Poison Fang ends up being a critical hit, bringing Unpheasant to the red and poisoned. Facade brings Batman down to 6 HP. I switch to Scrat and he heals with a max potion. Discharge then defeats Unpheasant. Samurott comes out. Discharge brings it to half health and paralyzes it. The paralysis pops off and a second discharge finishes him off. Sage goes down to acrobatics. Bouffalant is his last Pokemon. I switch to Queen, who survives a head charge. I switch to Nightwing and luckily he went for Wild Charge. I use Swords Dance and he goes for a head charge. Acrobatics then finishes Bouffalant off. I then challenge the Elite Four, starting with Marshall. He leads with Throw and I lead with Nightwing. I use Swords Dance to set up for a sweep. He goes for Rock Tomb, lowering my speed. I go for a second Swords Dance and Nightwing avoids the second Rock Tomb. Acrobatics obliterates Throw. Conkeldurr comes out and lands a Stone Edge, doing a good amount of damage. Acrobatics wrecks Conkeldurr. Minxiao does decent damage with high jump kick, but also falls to acrobatics. Sock is his last Pokemon. He lands Rock Slide and causes Nightwing to flinch. I switch to Skarmory. Fly brings Sock to the red. I go for Night Slash, knowing he would heal with a full restore. I did this so that Fly could finish him off. Next I take on Caitlyn. She starts with Musharna and I start with America. A critical slash brings Musharna to a little under half. She goes for Yawn. I switch to Nightwing to prevent America falling asleep and a Charge Beam. She goes for Yawn again and I switch to America. She goes for Yawn once more and I switch to Scrat and she goes for Yawn again. This time I use Volt Switch to do some damage and to switch into America. She keeps going for Yawn for a while.
2 hours later.
I switch to Scrat and she goes for Charge Beam. Volt Switch brings her to the red and I switch to Nightwing. She sets up a Reflect. I switch to Scrat and she goes for Dream Eater. Volt Switch finishes her off and I bring America out and she brings Sigilyph out. This thing sucks. Slash does about a quarter of damage and Ice Beam brings America to about a third of his health. I switch to Batman since he has high special defense and he survives a Psychic. Sheesh. Confuse Ray lands and Sigilyph hurts itself. I switch to Scrat and Air Slash brings Scrat to the red. Thunderbolt brings it to the red and paralyzes it. Sigilyph then hurts itself in confusion and faints. Gothitelle comes out. I go for Volt Switch, doing a little bit of damage. I bring Nightwing out, who tanks a Shadow Ball. I go for Swords Dance to raise attack. She goes for a Psychic and Nightwing barely survives. X-Scissor finishes her off. Runic Clus comes out and falls to X-Scissors as well. I make my way to challenge Grimsley. He leads with Leopard and I lead with America. He goes for a Fake Out. He then uses Attract, causing America to be immobilized by love. Ugh. Night Slash brings America to low green and America gets over the attraction and destroys Leopard with superpower. Scrafty comes out. I switch to Nightwing and he misses a Rock Tomb. I go for Swords Dance and he goes for Crunch. Acrobatics defeats him. Crocodile comes out and gets an Intimidate on Nightwing. Crunch brings Nightwing to low yellow and X-Scissor brings Crocodile to the red. He goes for a full restore and X-Scissors takes Crocodile down. Bisharp is his last Pokemon. I switch to America, who tanks a Night Slash and ends Bisharp with superpower. The final Elite Four member I take on is Chantal. She starts with Cofagrigus and I start with Blue. I use a Perish Song and she goes for Will-O-Wisp. I switch to America and she tries to go for a Shadow Ball, but it has no effect. I go for Hone Claws to raise America's attack and she goes for Psychic. She switches to Drifblim to keep Cofagrigus from fainting to Perish Song. Aerial Ace takes Drifblim to half. A second Aerial Ace finishes it off, but America gets hurt by Aftermath. Chandelure comes out. Aerial Ace brings Chandelure to half health, but she heals from a Citrus Berry. I switch to Blue to tank a Fire Blast. Shadow Ball brings Blue down to 2 HP. Dragon Pulse brings Chandelure down to yellow. I switch to Batman and luckily she went for an Energy Ball. Acrobatics finishes Chandelure off. Cofagrigus comes back out. I use Confuse Ray and she lands a Will-O-Wisp. I switch to Starscream, who tanks a Psychic. 2 Night Slashes take Cofagrigus down. Golurk comes out. Night Slash does a third of its health and Brick Break brings Starscream into the yellow. Golurk's ability gets changed to Mummy since Starscream had it. A second Night Slash brings Golurk to about a quarter of health left and Brick Break brings Starscream to the red. She goes for a full restore and Night Slash does a third of Golurk's health. I switch to Nightwing and Brick Break barely does anything to him. I go for Swords Dance and she goes for Shadow Punch. Acrobatics defeats Golurk. With Chantal defeated, there's only one person standing in my way of becoming champion. My final opponent is none other than Iris. She starts with Hydreigon and I start with America. She goes for Dragon Pulse, bringing America to low green, and critical superpower obliterates Hydreigon. She sends out Lapras. I switch to Starscream and Ice Beam takes it down to half health. Steel Wing barely does anything and Ice Beam finishes Starscream off. Thunderbolt from Scrap brings Lapras to a quarter of its health, but Ice Beam freezes Scrap to death. She uses a full restore superpower, brings her back to low yellow, and Slash finishes her off. Druddigon comes out, I switch to blue, and Rock Slide brings him to the red. Dragon Pulse brings Druddigon to the yellow, and Flamethrower finishes blue off. I bring Batman out and land a Confuse Ray on her, and she hurts herself. Acrobatics finishes Druddigon off. Archeops comes out, I go for Confuse Ray and she goes for Acrobatics. I switch to Nightwing and she hurts herself. Acrobatics does decent damage to Nightwing. I use Swords Dance. 2 Acrobatics finish Archeops off. Aggron faints to a Bulldoze. Haxorus is her final Pokemon. She goes for Dragon Dance and a critical Acrobatics almost killed Haxorus, but it had a freaking Focus Sash. Dual Chop finishes Nightwing off along with Batman and America. So, attempt 3. This time I used Home Claws to ensure superpower will kill Hydreigon, since a critical isn't guaranteed. America survives a second Dragon Pulse and kills Hydreigon with superpower. Lapras comes out, I switch to Starscream and Ice Beam once again brings him down to about half health. I get some spikes out and Lapras finishes him off with a Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt from Scrap brings Lapras to half health and he dies to Ice Beam. Superpower from America finishes Lapras off. Druddigon comes out and is hurt by the spikes. I switch to blue, tanking the Flamethrower. Dragon Pulse sends Druddigon to low yellow and Rock Slide finishes blue off. Acrobatics from Batman ends Druddigon. Archeops comes out, I land a Confuse Ray, and Batman barely survives a Rock Slide. Sheesh. I switch to Nightwing, and Acrobatics brings him to low green. Archeops hurts itself in confusion, and I get Swords Dance off. Archeops hurts itself again, and Acrobatics defeats her. Aggron faints to one Bulldoze again. Haxorus comes out and goes for Dual Chops, bringing Nightwing to the red. Acrobatics brings her to the red as well. She uses a full restore, and Acrobatics sends her back to the red. Honestly, I should have just gone for Bulldoze to slow her down, but oh well. She finishes Nightwing off with a Dual Chop. Batman comes out and finishes Haxorus off with Acrobatics, winning me the battle and making me the new champion. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you want to see more Nuzlocke videos, be sure to subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like. While you're at it, go check out my Mono Fire Challenge in Pokemon Y.